would you forgive them? So picture this. You wake up one morning, your phone goes off, and you're told that your 2 siblings and 3 children have all been killed by someone. He didn't even know them or you. He was just chasing after someone else for revenge and his own personal pursuit of glory. The person on the phone tells you to try to move past this and start a new life, and above all, don't turn on the TV. Obviously, the curiosity burning at you, you do exactly that. And when you turn it on, you immediately see your family's murderer. But he's not facing jail time. He's not on the TV because he's been caught for his crimes or anything, but because he's out there saving people. Hundreds of them, thousands of them even. No one else out there knows what he did to your family. Instead, they're cheering him on. He's considered by the world to be the #1 hero, the man who's saved more people than anyone else. And so he won't face any repercussions at all because the country needs him right now. It's at war, it needs his strength, but that man is your father, who was a brutal abuser to you and your siblings back when you were younger. Following this day, several years pass by. You see this guy a lot, and it's impossible to deny that that man has significantly changed. You can tell that he wouldn't do anything like that again. He spent the entire time trying to do good, trying to help people. He's now helped far more people than he ever hurt. He's put more good into the world than suffering by this point. So, can you forgive him? If not, would you at least say that he's made up for his past crimes? Of course, the man I'm talking about was a combination of Thorfinn and Endeavour, both of which tackle the question of what it means to atone, if and when someone can say that they've made up for their past crimes. It's an incredibly interesting question and one which doesn't have a simple answer. Is it when they've helped more people than they've hurt? Is it when their victims say so? Is it when they've done more good than harm? Obviously that's quite hard to quantify, so is it just never? You might have a completely different answer, right? But one thing I will note, which you might have noticed as well, is that whilst a lot of people have questioned whether Endeavour can atone, I've never seen anyone say the same thing about Thorfinn, despite his crimes honestly being far worse and on a much larger scale. I don't think I've ever seen a single person say, oh, Thorfinn should have been punished more for his crimes. He doesn't deserve to be out here doing what he's doing, and either way it doesn't make up for everything he's done. It's interesting, right? And I think there's 4 main reasons for that. Firstly, we see the story through Thorfinn's eyes, which subconsciously but significantly changes how we perceive it, especially if we don't stop to really dig into it. Secondly, he has different, much more sympathetic circumstances than Endeavour. He was much younger. His motivation behind it is something that we can at least understand, we can sympathize with, right? He wants revenge, he wants justice. There's this tangible reason behind what he's doing. Endeavour, not so much. It's a really strange dynamic of living vicariously through his kids that's just a bit weird. The only thing on his mind is what's in it for him, his own gain. You could of course argue the same about Thorfinn, but you see the point I'm making here. Thirdly, and I think this is honestly just the biggest one, it's just due to Endeavour's story hitting a lot closer to home for people. It feels far more real. There are way more abusers in the world than people who've killed 1,000 guys and had to go on the run, right? And yet we probably see them less often in media as well, which makes them hit even harder. And lastly, which is also another big one, we don't see much of Thorfinn's victims because, they're dead. Whereas we spend a lot of time with Endeavour's and really understand everything he's put them through, the full depth of what he's done. In season 2, we spend a lot of time with Shoto. We feel a bit of a connection to him, we like him, etc., which makes everything Endeavour's done hit us even harder. Of course, the pair of them do have some similarities as well. Unable to quench that conflict within them, they chased after the #1 hero spot and defeating Askeladd respectively, only to kind of half get what they were after, but not at all in the way they wanted. Endeavour became a hideous abuser to both his wife and children, in fact, creating children for the sole purpose of living vicariously through them if and when they reached the #1 spot. He discarded those incapable of achieving it as failures and refused to really spend any time with them whatsoever. Thorfinn spent a decade committing countless murders, sometimes helping out in raids on innocent villages. We do see that he's generally a bit more reluctant to do so. He feels very guilty about it, but it doesn't change the fact that he still helps out in these raids regardless. He lived a miserable, isolated decade away from his family, all for the chance to join Askeladd to get revenge for his father's death. Despite knowing that, Thors didn't want that whatsoever, and at the end of it all that suffering meant nothing for either of them. All Might's retirement gave Endeavour the #1 spot, but he'd forever lost the chance to prove he was stronger, leaving a hollow, bitter feeling for him. Likewise, Thorfinn saw Askeladd die, but it wasn't to his own hands, making it meaningless in his eyes. You know, he could have killed him at any point along the journey, but he needed to be done in a certain way. And I suppose you could kind of say the same about Endeavour as well. He does at some point say to All Might, "Oh, if all I wanted was the title, I could have played nicely like you." But like, even if he did, he wasn't going to be #1, let's be real here. So it's a little different there, right? But regardless, what makes both of their arcs so fantastic is that what follows isn't a cheap, quick redemption in a heroic, self-sacrificial moment. There's no sudden big deed that undoes everything they've done. You know, that often ends up being okay, but not anywhere near as gripping as what these two have gone through that make their arc so legendary. It's a slower, more drawn-out atonement for the pair of them, where they have to make a consistent, enduring effort to try and make up for what they've done. Thorfinn sets off to discover and create Vinland, a land where he intends to save more people than he's ever killed. Obviously a very, very long task. Likewise, even by the end of MHA, Endeavour is still making amends, as he says, for the rest of his life. Of course, there are also some major differences. The biggest one, of course, and the one we're going to talk about quite a lot, is the fact that Endeavour's victims are still around, whereas Thorfinn's aren't. Although Endeavour states very explicitly that he doesn't want his family's forgiveness, they're still there. You know, he has a judge, or several of them, watching his every move, bearing witness to what he's doing, at times giving him feedback, even if it's just negative and, yeah, I'm never speaking to you again, right? But Thorfinn doesn't have that at all, or at least not until he meets Hild, but I'm not going to go into Season 3 spoilers in this video. So I mentioned a few points at which someone could potentially say they've atoned, when their victims forgive them and when they've saved more people than they've hurt. The former is obviously impossible for Thorfinn, and the latter is pretty impossible as well. To actually save more lives than he's taken is an incredibly long task. It's likely impossible. For Endeavour, both of these were theoretically doable tasks. He's certainly saved more people than he's ever hurt, but for Thorfinn, his victims aren't around to ever forgive him, and the number of people he's killed is far too high for him to have even kept count. To actually save that many lives, one, may never be possible, and two, it's just really not that simple, right? If someone's killed 1,000 people, are we going to say that they're still bad if they've saved 999, neutral at 1,000, and good at 1,001? Like, maybe there's an argument for that, but it's just not really how it actually works, right? So, is that just it for him then? Should he give up on ever making up for his past mistakes? Does he deserve a chance to try and do good in the world, or be happy again? And the most interesting one to me is it selfish for both him and Endeavour to want the opportunity to make up for what they've done? This is something that comes up in both of their stories. You know, Natsu calls Endeavour out on one-sidedly wanting to patch things up. And without going into any spoilers, Thorfinn later faces a similar dilemma when he encounters the daughter of someone he previously killed. He can't bring back her family, so what can he do? And so I think this is where it's useful to separate atonement and redemption. In casual conversation, they're pretty interchangeable, and obviously there's a lot of overlap, but essentially, atonement is defined as the action of making amends for a wrong or injury. It's about what you do, whereas redemption in this context is about being saved from sin, error, or evil and being cleared from a debt. It's more of a state of being where you've changed as a person. In a way, I guess, atonement is kind of the work you do, and redemption is what you become. So, for example, Vegeta from Dragon Ball, despite all he's done in the past, no one around him sees him as being a villain anymore, right? Maybe Piccolo kind of does, but he's pretty much redeemed himself, right? Likewise with someone like Zuko from Avatar. But for Endeavour, much less so. His family have quite mixed views on him, even by the very end of the series. He's repeatedly told that he will never be forgiven for what he did. And he accepts that, right? He understands it. He gets that forgiveness is entirely up to the victim, if they want to or not, but atonement is the responsibility of the perpetrator. And part of what makes his arc so unique among typical redemption arcs is that he's not actually trying to be forgiven. He's not trying to be redeemed and have his family say, "Oh, we forgive you now." Everything he does is done with the knowledge that it won't result in a happy ending for him. Hence why you often hear his story referred to as an atonement arc, not a redemption arc. He's doing the work to atone, but he's never actually redeemed for it at all. He effectively exiles himself from his family, prioritizing their well-being over his own desire to be a part of it, cutting out any chance of a reward at the end of it all. And that moment specifically was when I felt like I could honestly respect his attempts at atonement, that he was doing everything he could be to be atoning as best as he can, completely respecting their wishes no matter the cost to himself, and acknowledging that he's not entitled to forgiveness regardless of his efforts to change. I personally found this extremely refreshing and real compared to your typical redemption where everyone sees them as good again. Your most famous redemption arcs, Vegeta, Zuko, even Thorfinn, who I'll come to in a moment, or Bakugo actually, also from MHA, they're surrounded by people who treat them as though nothing ever really happened, right? But not Endeavour. He's not given an end goal the way the other characters I mentioned are. There's no finish line for him. And besides the fact that I really appreciate that it's not a simple one big dramatic moment to undo all the harm, right? I mentioned that at the start. Instead, it's a mundane, repetitive effort for the rest of his life. But what really makes Endeavour, and of course Zuko, so good, is that they have to come face to face with their victims and face their judgment. It's those interactions between perpetrator and victim that really turn a good redemption arc into a great one. Zuko encountering the Earth and Water tribes, Thorfinn encountering Hild, Endeavour and his family. They all realize that even saving their lives, making some huge heroic act, doesn't undo what they've done. And speaking of MHA, I think this is honestly kind of missing from the redemption side of Bakugo. Don't get me wrong, he's still great. He's still one of the series' biggest successes, in my opinion, but more from a character development side. His atonement arc is a little bit more one-sided. That challenge from the victims and the regression that causes isn't really there. The way we see Darby's dance break Endeavour down, force him to wrestle with whether he even deserves to atone. Likewise, when Hild challenges Thorfinn, his fresh start completely crumbles. He has to question whether he can atone, whether he has the right to, because, as Hild points out, nothing he does would ever bring her family back. Bakugo never really gets that. Deku would have probably forgiven him on day one if he asked, and it's a bit more focused on these big, emotional, heroic moments. Deku actually doesn't say a single word back to him when he finally gets an apology, and he never once challenges Bakugo on what he did, how it made him feel, and that's fine, right? Deku's very forgiving. Obviously, the author didn't just want two identical atonement arcs. Bakugo's still an S-tier character, one of my favourite of all time, and there's a lot of other things going on with him that are great, but just from a pure atonement redemption perspective, his journey is a lot smoother. It's more straightforward than the other ones I mentioned. It's just about him coming to these realizations on his own. He's never challenged on it. It doesn't really challenge us as readers to wrestle with these questions of if, how, and when someone can atone the same way Thorfinn and Endeavour do. It's more just kind of, well, Deku seems cool with him now, he's helping everyone out and he's clearly changed. No one around him really cares that he used to bully Deku the way he did, so that's that, I guess. But this of course is becoming a bit of a side tangent, right? Let's go back to the original questions, especially regarding Thorfinn, who we've not spoken so much about. When can someone say they've atoned? How should they go about doing so? And most interestingly, do they deserve to? Regarding the latter, Thorfinn initially thinks it's a firm no. Following Askeladd's death, he's captured and taken as a slave. He becomes hollow, miserable, and apathetic. But it doesn't really seem like that's because of the slavery. You know, he almost has this slight peacefulness as he goes about his work that we've not seen from him before. You know, but again, it's not out of contentment, just emptiness. You know, one look at his eyes says it all, right? He doesn't care if he lives or dies. He doesn't even react when the farmhands slash away at him. He accepts any and all suffering that comes his way without the slightest complaint or rebellion, just living off crumbs of bread and wasting away. He, unlike most slaves, was offered an opportunity at freedom one day, but he doesn't even really care or attempt to work towards it until Aina shows up, where he just starts going along with what he's doing. And then, of course, even when that plot of land he and Aina worked so hard on was destroyed out of nothing but spite, he can't bring himself to respond at all. You know, he says, "I've always been on the side of destroyers and plunderers, so I don't have the right to feel indignant about this." Of course, he lost his purpose as such and has no idea what his next one would be, but there's clearly an element here of, I don't deserve to atone, I don't deserve happiness coming from him. In fact, the idea of making up for his past crimes doesn't even seem to have occurred to him in the early stages of Season 2. Initially, anyway. Up until the instant where his field is destroyed, he has a fight with the farmhands, but what really starts him down a new path is a vision of the man he gave his life to try and kill, Askeladd. Now, as tempting as it is, I don't want to go too deep into just analysing Thorfinn in this video. I have a few videos on that, and will absolutely be making more the second Season 3 drops. But what I do want to focus on is what Askeladd says to him. He calls out to him for not having the time to mope around, telling him to let the dead hang off him and climb to fight a true battle. Then, after Thorfinn snaps out of that self-pity, then he decides to begin to atone, to make amends for what he's done. I've seen people say, and you may or may not agree with this, that him spending the rest of his life here would kind of be punishment for what he's done in the past. But for one, that doesn't really help anyone, and two, remember how I said he was kind of comfortable here? Right, he's empty, but there's something strangely easy about just beating yourself up and wallowing in self-pity. You know, it's often the easier route compared to climbing out of that. You know, in his vision with Askeladd, it'd be extremely easy, even by accident, to drop down and join them in their endless fighting and suffering. It'd be incredibly easy to tell himself that he deserves that and just join them forever. But to actually climb up, carrying the weight of everything he's done, and truly resolving to make up for it, is a hell of a lot harder. You know, as Askeladd says, unlike the petty, meaningless fighting below, that's a true battle, worthy of a true warrior. Both Thorfinn and Endeavour go through a phase of doubting or questioning their right to atone. And what's super interesting, and this completely changed the way I see Atonement as a whole, is that they both come to the realization that it's not about whether they deserve to atone or whether they're allowed to do so, it's that they don't have a right not to atone. Earlier on in the series, Endeavour fights a Nomu, a monster mindlessly obsessed with power with no care for who it hurts, a representation of his old self that he accepts before burning it up to be reborn. In the following season, he fights Ending, someone who wants Endeavour to kill him, who has a vision for his death and wants it to happen a certain way. Although Endeavour doesn't explicitly say it, I think this too represents a part of him, the part that sees himself going out in a heroic, self-sacrificing blaze of glory as atonement and punishment for his crimes. But that, once again, in a way is the easier route for him. It's easier than a lifetime of small, continuous efforts. Now, of course, as I'm sure many of you are thinking, there has to be a lot more to this, right? Someone can't just decide one day, oh, I'm going to atone, I'm going to change, and everyone around that just has to accept them and welcome them back, etc. Put everything behind them, hold their hands up and go, oh, okay, go ahead, man, I've already forgotten everything you did. Right? And I absolutely agree that that's just not how it works. Especially when it's incredibly easy to say you'll change or do something, but within a few months fall back into old ways. Of course, we've spoken plenty about Endeavour and his family's reluctance to welcome him back, completely justifiable. Likewise, Zuko, great example of this, right? In the highly praised Zuko Alone episode, he sees people who have suffered a lot under the Fire Nation. He helps them out plenty, he even saves them from soldiers, but that doesn't mean they're unjustified for still hating him afterwards. Likewise, when he goes to see the gang, just saying,
hello, Zuko here.
I'm good now, so yeah, let's just work together and forget everything I've done. No shit, they don't agree, right? But this leads us to the last question of the video. If you remember at the start, I had this whole scenario about someone who's done so much harm to you and your family. Now imagine you have the opportunity to either imprison or kill that person, to get revenge on them. Maybe power scalers will rip into me for this, I don't know. But it felt to me that if the gang wanted to here, the 4 of them, 5 if Appa joins in, could have very, very easily captured Zuko here. Zuko struggles for the entire series against Aang one-on-one. He's not winning this, right? If I'm wrong, then let's just say for the sake of argument that they can regardless. But what happens if they do that? Likewise in Vinland Saga, again without going into spoilers, this relative of one of Thorfinn's victims has the opportunity to kill him. But she hears him and his companions say that he's a changed man. So what happens if she does? Zuko and Thorfinn, what would the pair of them go on to do if their stories continue? If they're genuinely good and are gonna go on and do so much good in the world, is it then selfish for Katara and Hild to prevent that for their own justice or revenge, to take that away from the world? And if so, what about if they have good intentions to do good but don't, right? Through bad luck, incompetence, or for example, if Thorfinn lost a leg so couldn't really do a lot to make up for his past mistakes, does that then change that? These arcs are also good because they put forward these kinds of questions. Chances are if someone said that a mass murderer was going to spend the rest of his life imprisoned, the vast majority of people wouldn't bat an eye, right? Myself included, absolutely. But after reading all of Vinland Saga, it feels harder to justify why Thorfinn shouldn't have had a second chance than why he should have. Obviously, it's not always so easy or straightforward to directly transfer this over to real life. But a truly great redemption arc, honestly, any truly great arc at least makes you question what you currently think of it. Even if the end result is that you didn't change your mind, right? And going back to Endeavour, MHA has a couple other characters that are at least interesting to think about with regards to morality, like Gentle Criminal and Lady Nagant, and the latter in particular could have been super interesting if explored in more detail, but unfortunately, because their roles in the story are so minor, their redemptions as such don't really hit at all. There's none of what we've mentioned. There's no back and forth between victims and abusers, no struggle to improve and atone. Honestly, there's not really anything besides, well, we were kind of bad before, but now we're good, and here's our big heroic moment. Both fantastic characters. I spend a solid 15-20 minutes on each of them in my 5.5 hour MHA vid, but the redemption part of their story is a little hollow. It doesn't ask us these questions the same way the legendary arcs we've spoken about do. Nagant and Gentle Criminal, their turnarounds feel more like plot points. Thorfinn, Endeavour, Zuko, they feel more like lives being lived. So if we go back to that nightmare scenario I started the video with, the father who destroyed everything but is now saving everyone, the uncomfortable truth that Vinland Saga and My Hero Academia force us to confront is that both versions of that man are real. You know, the monster existed, the hero or savior exists, and one does not erase the other. It can make us uncomfortable because it forces us to admit, or to acknowledge at least, that a destroyer is potentially capable of becoming a creator. People are capable of changing their lives around, right? It would be so much easier if they didn't, right? It would be so much easier if villains just stayed villains forever. You know, it would be so much simpler if they just stayed evil so we could hate them in peace. But these stories don't let us have it that easy. You know, I don't know what my answer to that scenario at the start of the video would be, if I'm honest, but I do know that before watching these stories, it would have been an outright flat no. But now, I'm not so sure. But what about you? Could you forgive them?